The Wednesday week is sponsored by the Riverside Cafe, the perfect place for a pre-match pint.
There's a chance here, a great save by Turner from the clear. Might come a terrific goal by Sheridan.
Brexman against Jones. Get in.
You could have two goalkeepers in there that would have trouble saving.
Hello and welcome to the Wednesday week, the Sheffield Wednesday podcast. I'm James. Now, if you listened last week, you'll know that it was our one-off special, Christmas special, with James Allen of the Owls Americast, who's back in Sheffield over Christmas. Well, here I am, sat once again with Mr. James Allen. Hello.
Good evening.
This is, in my mind, this is the James and James Epilogue. So if the chairman can have one, then so can we. Last week we were in the beer house on Ecclesall Road. This week slightly less glamorous surroundings of my kitchen. And that's because I have a major bout of the man flu at the moment. I've been under par for a couple of days and I didn't feel up to the pub. So apologies for sounding a bit snotty and sounding like I'm clearly reading from a script, which I am because I wrote one earlier because I thought my brain isn't working quite right. So I just need words in front of me to just say. And for this reason, I'm actually drinking lemon and ginger tea with honey, which is very boring. Hopefully more interesting in time-honoured fashion. James, what are you drinking?
I'm drinking the contents of your fridge while you're recovering. It's beautiful surroundings of your washing and Christmas detritus. So, what did you give me? You've given me a bottle of caffeine. Quite literally,
it is a bottle of caffeine.
It's a siren kettle sour with coffee, and it's delicious and it's slightly masking the smell of newly washed underpants, which is tremendous.
I have, even though I'm not having any beer tonight, I have picked out your next beer for you, just so I could have a beer to talk about, which is also a Siren craft brew, which is called the Tickle Monster, which is a triple IPA with mango and cedar wood. So I assume that'll taste slightly fruity and a little woody.
So in the space of 30 seconds, we've talked about the Tickle Monster, something being a little bit woody, your underpants, and the fact that we've relocated to your kitchen. Before anybody starts casting any aspersions, there's nothing dodgy about this podcast. I'm very grateful to James for hosting me, so looking forward to the conversation.
We sat in the beer house exactly 7 days ago, talking about what a whirlwind few days it had been. Boy, how little we knew then.
I think we were quite optimistic as well, weren't we?
We were, yeah. It was actually on the way back from Brentford on the train where we said, you know what, we should get together and discuss everything that's happened since. We'll do, one final podcast before you go back to the States. And again, how little we knew then. I mean, it is like we could have done a podcast pretty much every day, I think, over the last 7 days and had something to talk about. I'm right in thinking that after today you're pretty much gone. You're off down to London and then you're back to the States.
Yeah, exactly right. I fly home on Friday, so I've completed my tour of duty. 5 games, 4 of which I've been attending in person. I think I posted the stats the other day. It was watched 4, lost 4, scored 1, conceded 8. So
yep.
not the best couple of weeks in Wednesday history, and probably if it's anything to do with the curse of me being in the country, then I'll be long gone by the time we play Carlisle on Saturday. It's
it's also got progressively worse, hasn't it? By every bit of Wednesday that you've taken in along the way, it's got a little bit worse time after time.
Yeah, the Wolves game match looks quite good in comparison now. If you go back to the beginning,
as we said earlier, I mean, last week kind of if last week felt positive and the first kind of shoots of happiness, this week kind of feels like it needs tying up in a bag with some rocks inside and plunging into the Don or the Hudson, doesn't really matter which. Last week we kind of promised a positive podcast. Probably not going to be the same this week.
It'd be pretty hard to try and take certainly the last 2 games since we spoke in the immediate aftermath of Christmas and try and polish that, because quite frankly they're probably 2 of the worst performances we've seen in recent times. I would go as far as to say the performance yesterday against Burton was probably the worst performance that many Wednesdayites have seen in probably a decade. Yeah. It was, the mood coming out of Hillsborough in the driving rain on New Year's Day was as sour as the sour I'm drinking right now. We're going to struggle to find the positives. I mean, there are a few things that we can maybe provide some context to, but it's been a really, really bad week in the world of Wednesday.
I did in the aftermath of the Burton game in the car on the way back. Actually, I sat with my phone trying to come up with 5 positives. I was kind of thinking, right, if I was working for the Star and I had to do the 5 things we learned and thought I'm going to do 5 positives off the back of the game, then I'm going to have a go. And I managed it, and I'll run through them later on. They're not brilliant, don't get excited, but I did have a go. Let's kind of cover things chronologically, because the first thing that happened after we recorded last week, which we touched on and almost kind of, slightly kind of poured some kind of, cast this as being quite unlikely, but Carl lost to Swansea, which a week ago was just a bit of a rumour, and very quickly, I think pretty much within 24 hours, became reality. And you said you could see him working actually in the Premier League with Swansea.
Well, and he certainly won his first game. I think I haven't seen how his second's going on. The last time I checked on Twitter, it looked like it was going to get waterlogged. So, I can see him being a success over the course of a season in the Premier League. But let's address it head on. We were talking about a relationship analogy last week, and the fact that it was going to be hard to see him with another partner. Probably turns out that he was at least in text communication. There was probably some nefarious goings on behind our back before that deal was sealed, because although he's painted it publicly as being that there were lots of expressions of interest as soon as he became free from Wednesday, Swansea came along, he couldn't say no. I think we have to assume, based on the fact that we know that he was in contact with Swansea over the summer, possibly earlier, at the very least his advisor had been talking to Swansea in the run-up to the decision for him to leave Hillsborough. And if we want to be cynical, it may well have been the driving factor in the mutual decision that he and Mr. Chansiri came to for him to depart when he did. And frankly, as time goes on, those extra days, it begins to look like that was more of a Carlos-driven decision, that the club didn't have an immediate contingency plan in place, which we can come on to. So yeah, he's down in Swansea. He won his first game 2-1 with 2 goals in the last 5 minutes, and we had sort of the pain of getting back to the pub after the game at Brentford and seeing Carlos on the big screen with his fists pumping and raising all the spirits of the Swansea fans. Good. I was honest in last week in saying that I wish him all the best. I want him to be successful. I wish him all the best. I want him to be successful. I hope he keeps them up. But it's hard. It's hard to see it so immediate. Talk about the immediately in the aftermath of the divorce, he's parading his new partner right in front of our faces.
Absolutely. I've kind of been on a bit of a roller coaster with this, because in the immediate aftermath, I kind of thought, well, he'd obviously got that lined up and felt a little cheated, and then kind of thought, well, do you know what? Good luck to him. I wish him all the best. And then I read his interview, his statement that he did with the BBC, where he said that when he was a kid playing for Braga, he dreamed of one day knowing that Swansea being his destiny, and just thought, this is the relationship analogy again. This is a little bit like when he goes and meets the parents of his new love and just says whatever it takes to win them over, even though he said exactly the same to your parents when you took him to meet them.
I feel like he's taken his new partner to the same restaurant he took you to on your first date,
and said all the same things about how lovely my hair looked and what a nice outfit I'd got on, all those kind of things. He's just rolling out exactly the same lines, because it was exactly the kind of thing that he'd have said about Wednesday, and we all thought, well, he really grew to love our club. And do you know what? As time's gone past, I've just stopped caring. I think the events of the last kind of 24, 48 hours have kind of pushed Carlos to the back of, I think, most fans' minds, and just think, well, he's gone now, he gets on with his business, we've really got our own shit to worry about, and Carlos is no longer a part of that, and let's not worry about it. I think if anything, yesterday, what I probably did just think slightly was, I think everyone was quite nice about him when he left, and actually, has he left us in a bit of a bigger predicament than we probably realised originally, and did he jump ship at the exact right time for him?
And I think that's a legitimate concern. It was certainly, you're absolutely right. We have to move on now, because we're going to come to it in a second. We have a crisis in front of us. It's definitely a crisis week at Wednesday, and probably a potentially a crisis second half of the season now. Whether he is the causal force behind that, whether there are other factors we're going to talk about in a minute, but there was a lot of sentiment around me in Hillsborough with people essentially laying the blame at his door, that he'd built this and now he's bridged off it to a better opportunity to the glory of the Premier League. People are going to have opinions on that. Whether that's true or otherwise isn't really an issue now. He's part of Wednesday history. He's not part of Wednesday future. And what we need to do right now is we need to solve what's in front of us. So I think there are some legitimate questions to be raised about how much he was utilising Wednesday as a vehicle to further his own ambitions. And there's been some discussion about potential further moves down the line that he may have option on in European football in coming seasons. Again, you can't fault the guy for being ambitious. You can't fault him for furthering his own career. 14 clubs leading up to Wednesday probably should have told us what we were getting involved with. Maybe he had a bit of a reputation before we started dating, and we chose to be blind because love is blind. Now, in the bitter aftermath and the hollow glow of a New Year's morning, we've got to try and work out what we're left with.
Well, onwards and upwards, as they say, and the next kind of thing that was doing the rounds was actually something else that we kind of laughed off a week ago, and that was Steve McLaren, who was, as we said 7 days ago, was knocking around the fairly long odds in the betting for the next Wednesday manager, and then almost overnight kind of shoots straight up to be clear odds on favourite, having quit his job. I think was he working in Holland? Quitting his job abroad anyway. No, he's in Israel, wasn't he? I don't know where I got Holland from. I'm moving back to the UK to pursue coaching options here, and it did for a while. It looked like, well, this is a done deal, isn't it? This is happening, and it sounds like if certain people are to be believed, that it was actually the reaction of the fan base that swayed Mr. Chansiri to change his mind and not go through with it. I mean, the whole thing, just what a big mess that is.
Just an incredible mess. I mean, if you almost go back and listen to what we said in the beer house, we just said, no chance. I think that was your phrase. And pretty much every Wednesday, as soon as his name was seriously linked, said exactly the same thing. I don't think there's anything wrong with Mr. Chansiri meeting with people within the game, of which Steve McLaren has been there, done some things. It's worth him meeting with him. Yeah. What we don't know is whether that was ever serious. It was quite quickly put down in the press as soon as opinions started to be raised. Yeah. I think it might have been Rob Staten or Radio Sheffield. I can't remember which. One of which was contradicting the other. There was a bit of kind of a local media tete-a-tete going on. But this is a guy who I don't think would in any way meet our aspirations for a post-Carlos era, because of the legacy that he's created elsewhere of not really moving the needle on a whole series of clubs since his success probably over a decade ago now. If that was the level of ambition, that's concerning, in my opinion. I would have laughed him off if that had been a serious appointment, and I think we'd have all had a lot of questions in the fan base. If fan opinion led to that not being the case, then we can at least say that the chairman listens. So we just don't know. We don't know the machinations behind the scenes. But it was about a 20-hour period until that was thoroughly put to bed that I think many of us were kind of getting into the doom and gloom period before we'd even got to the weekend's games.
Yeah. All this happened before the first game of the period that we're talking about. So this kind of brings us on to Brentford on Saturday. It was your first trip to Brentford, first time you've been down there, and in a lot of ways a good day out. In a lot of ways, a pretty lousy day.
It was a smashing day out. It was absolutely brilliant, apart from the 90 minutes of football that we watched. And
we should have stayed in the pub.
We should have stayed in the pub. The Brentford guys, the Besotted guys, led by Billy, were consummate hosts. So everything that's ever been said on this podcast and elsewhere about how good that fan base is and how open they are and how welcoming they are to visiting fans is absolutely true. We were in the Globe, a little walk from the stadium, not one of the 3, not 4 pubs on the corners.
It is now 4 again.
It's back to 4.
I did lie to you. The one that closed down has now reopened under new ownership.
We didn't go to any of those. We went to the Globe, and I think we were in there for 3.5 hours before the game and another hour or so afterwards, and they were wonderful. It was a great day out. We had people joining us on the train from very early in the morning. sort of an eclectic route down to London via Retford. If anyone's ever been to Retford at 7:30 on a Saturday morning, they'll know that that's something you probably shouldn't be doing. We'd had fun regardless.
Yeah.
And actually, if you're dispassionate, the football was pretty good if you were a Brentford fan.
Yep.
You know, to put it simply, Brentford basically ran rings around us. Wednesday weren't at the races from very early in that game. The warning signs were there, and when Brentford chose to get out of first gear, they scored 2 absolutely superbly executed goals, and without ever really giving us the sense that they'd really hit their stride.
I would agree with all that, apart from one thing, that I don't think they ever really needed to get out of first gear. I think they scored 2 goals basically at a canter, and it felt like they just. It was a waltz for them. It was a walk in the park.
It absolutely was, and you've got to put it in context, because this was coming off the back of the Forest game, where all of our adrenaline was racing. That this was, your phrase, shackles off. The bull and bounce. We're getting the type of reaction from the players that they're now unleashed. They can do what they want. Well, it turns out when they do what they want, they don't seem to do very much. Because it was the flattest of flat performances. We reverted to a 4-4-2 diamond, kind of a curious position of reach almost in the number 10 role in place of Hooper. Just no dynamicism from the midfield. I thought Wallace, particularly kind of ordinary. And the back four just looked at 6s and 7s. We had Padil coming back in, no explanation to why that was the decision to bring him back into the back four, and he and Lewins were literally looking in opposite directions at each other and castigating each other when the first goal was scored, which was a nice through buster exercise for Lasse Vibe, and it only got worse in the second half.
It was a difficult game to try and come up with anything positive out of. It was, across the board it was poor, and I thought, I kind of summed it up in my mind afterwards and thought, you could have watched that game thinking Wednesday must have had a couple of players sent off, because it just felt like Brentford just had more players on the pitch. We had no space to do anything, and when we did get any space, we didn't really know what to do. Just a real a real poor day for us. We wondered whether or not, was that just a blip? Are we going to be all right under Bullen? Was it just a bit of a one-off? Is he still finding his feet a little bit? And I think we've had a bit more proof since that that's probably not the case, but we'll no doubt come to that. Did you have any positives from Brentford?
One of the positives I took actually was listening to how Brentford have turned into that side. We spent time with Billy afterwards talking about the Brentford model, and the fact that one of the questions I think that we posed him, in fact you posed him, was are they fearful that we might take Dean Smith off them? He's been linked with the Wednesday vacancy. He's an ex-Wednesday player. He's obviously doing very well in the Championship. A lot of fans have said they would like to see him, and he said, actually, you know what? No, I'm not concerned. And for one very simple reason: if he goes, we'll bring somebody in who'll play. He'll manage the squad in the same way, but the Brentford way, and essentially saying that they've got a model that works regardless of who's in the head coach position. And what that kind of hit me smack in between the eyes as we were heading away from the ground was, we are light years away from that. Yeah. As we're in this situation trying to choose our next manager, we are not in a position where we can confidently say that the person coming in has to adhere to the way that Wednesday do things. He's talking about the fact they've had a striker out playing for, I think, a Danish second division club. As they build up that player's confidence and his, try him out at that level of football, they know that they can bring him in now because of the level that he's reached. Again, contrast that to our development arrangements. It was just a really startling way of sort of setting the bar as to where we should be, as opposed to where we are. Bit of a reality check, if you will. And I thought that positive was actually pretty good if you could apply that to maybe some of the decisions we need to take.
It was an interesting time to play them, really, in that regard, wasn't it? And kind of chatting to Billy, who I could talk to Billy about football all day long and not get bored. But kind of talking about Dean Smith and talking about the Brentford system kind of meant that little bit more, considering the fact that we're at a bit of a crossroads at the moment, and people that are talking about Dean Smith maybe being a good choice for us. Having talked to Billy on Saturday, I kind of came away thinking, forget that. Look at Mark Warburton and what he's done since leaving Brentford, And again, quite timely, he got fired this week by Nottingham Forest.
Yep.
You would think now that that's it in terms of Championship. No one else is going to give him a shot at that level. He's going to have to go right down the leagues now if he wants to continue working in football. And he wasn't originally a football guy anyway, so he might go back to was he working banking or something before he got into football. Because he was just a coach that fitted well into the system at Brentford. It was the system that was successful. He was just a coach that suited it, and you see when he's not got that system around him, he can't do it, and that would be the concern with Dean Smith, that you bring him to Wednesday, where it's not that our system is not the same as Brentford. We don't have a system. We have nothing. We've had the fledgling shoots of it right at the start of Mr. Chansiri's kind of reign, where we did have a transfer committee and a football kind of group, a football committee of sorts, but that's gone now anyway. So it's not even about our system being different. We just don't have one. We don't,
and when we start talking about the Burford game, and Burford, that's a horrible conflagration of two very disappointing games. The Burton game in a second. We're going to talk about how just painfully apparent that is now in terms of the football that we're playing. As soon as the person whose philosophy happened to be exerting influence over the club disappears, there's nothing to protect us at that point. So you bring in a manager who's benefited from a system like that, and you're relying entirely on their ability to transplant that into a different environment without infrastructure. I don't think that's credible. So I'm completely with you that Dean Smith's success at Brentford is not an indicator of whether he'd be a success at Wednesday. To try and answer your original question, I think the only positive I really could take away from Saturday from the playing side was maybe the heart that a couple of players showed, and they stood out as the exceptions, and that was probably Reach and Joao, who I thought genuinely kept running, kept trying, kept pushing, and they just stood out as being a long way different to the rest of the squad, who unfortunately just didn't show any of that spark. Maybe Jack Hunt when he came on as well towards the end of the game, showing a bit more pace, a bit more endeavour down the right hand side.
Okay, next thing on my list is back to off the field matters, and this coming a couple of hours before kick-off against Burton, and seriously out of the blue. I don't think anyone expected this, and that was the appointment of a chief exec. Now, we've talked, maybe not so much on record, but certainly we've had many conversations between us where we've talked about the need for a chief exec, and actually more than that, the need for some kind of structure around Sheffield Wednesday, and we'd kind of thought, well, we know it's not going to happen. Out of the blue, it does, and we have a chief exec, and I'm going to apologise now for my terrible pronunciation here. I'm going with Quatrième Mier. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but hopefully it is. I think we could probably fill an hour here just talking about her record at Charlton. I think that's been fairly widely covered and discussed in the media. So let's skip to the important bit, really, which is how do you feel about it? And I suppose most importantly, are you worried?
Yes, I'm worried, but I'm not necessarily worried for the reasons that have been doing the rounds in the last 24 hours.
Okay.
So, I mean, on the face of it, given her reputation, given the vitriol which is directed towards her almost universally from Charlton fans, we should be very, very worried. Her reputation coming in is of somebody who's dispassionate, disconnected from fans, who's on record as having questioned the role that fans play in a football club. It's not the appointment that you would expect to see if you wanted to extend an olive branch to a fan base. So reason to be worried. The reason I'm worried, though, is not necessarily what she did or did not do at Charlton. The only thing I'll say in mitigation to that is it's very clear that she is the figurehead who gathered all of the anger of the Charlton fans for everything that was happening at Charlton. Most of which I think ultimately should be laid at the blame of the owners. I think it's the Duchâtelet group who connect back to Standard Liège, where she came from. So whether she was personally responsible or not is almost hard to identify. The thing that worries me is her experience level. So in my opinion, every appointment that we make at Hillsborough now should be with a view to being a Premier League club. And I would have expected to see a Premier League quality or Premier League experienced chief executive coming into Wednesday at the point where that appointment was made. With due respect to her, and I'm willing to be proven wrong, she's been at two football clubs, Standard Liège in Belgium and Charlton Athletic, neither of whom fit that bill in terms of level of experience. She's relatively junior in her career. I think she was almost a relatively newly qualified lawyer when she took on the legal counsel role at Liège, and then parachuted into the CEO role at Charlton, where she was for I think 2 or maybe 3 years max. I think the question that I'll ask is, is she genuinely ready to take on a task of the magnitude of Sheffield Wednesday?
Similar ways, I think I have concerns. I kind of feel like she could very well have just been the mouthpiece of a much wider problem at Charlton, and it's probably a fair and true statement to say that she did oversee probably the most unsuccessful period in that club's history, which I think culminated in their lowest league position for 90 odd years last season. So it's not a great CV in that regard. But you have, with anything like that, when you've got an owner who is not public facing, he doesn't do what Mr. Chansiri does. He will not engage with the fans at all. Doesn't do forums, anything like that. There is never a public statement from their owner. It all comes from the chief exec, which means that inevitably, you are the shit filter in that situation. And if things are going well, then everyone's going to love you, and if things are not going well, then you are going to take the blame for it all. It's very possible that she is absolutely terrible at her job. I don't know, but it's also possible that actually there were much bigger problems within the club, and she was just required to be the person that took kind of the flak for that. She's certainly not helped herself with some of the things that she's said, and it's a worry that she clearly isn't someone that understands football. On the flip side of that, you could say that sometimes someone that's maybe not involved in the nitty-gritty of football and the emotion that goes with it can maybe see things a little bit more clearly, and so maybe you can try and pull some kind of positive from that, and that's quite difficult to do. But I do think that we've just got to give her a chance. We know that our owner is different to the owner at Charlton. Mr. Chansiri, far from trying to hide away and not respond to fans, probably responds to fans a little bit too much and is a little bit too public, and will respond to things, as we talked about a week ago, where very impassionately will respond to things almost on a whim, where he's putting out a statement at 2:00 in the morning. So it will be interesting to see what kind of job that she does within a very different setup at Sheffield Wednesday. The worry for me is just kind of like, is this a slight indication of what direction Mr. Chansiri wants us to go in as a club? And it's felt like we've been kind of we've been at this crossroads for a while, and even a kind of the meetings, the steering group meetings, and other things where Mr. Chansiri has kind of talked about the financial model that we operate within and how it requires all fans to kind of give that little bit more, so that we can kind of achieve what we all want to achieve. And if fans aren't willing to do it, then he needs to look at a different policy and go in a different direction. And you always just kind of think, yeah, he's just saying that. Is this actually an indication that we are going to go in a particular direction, and maybe it's not a direction that we really want to go in? And that is pure speculation, but that thought is in my mind, and I can't go with it.
And not unreasonably so, because you take those two things in combination. You have a hands-on owner who is Mr. Chansiri is not about to take his hand off the tiller at Hillsborough. So you then have to ask the question, if he's bringing a CEO in, recognising that he needs somebody to take more of the day-to-day leadership and decision-making within the club whole, including the football side, although I always raise the question about how a CEO can genuinely influence what happens on the pitch, apart from obviously sanctioning player transfers and otherwise. Her record at Charlton, if you strip away the emotion, you strip away the public statements, is one ultimately of cost cutting, keeping a budget under control, keeping them within FFP limits. I think they recorded a £13 million loss in 2016, a quite significant loss obviously on the previous year because of the relegation, but they still managed to retain a degree of financial solvability. Sold a lot of players. That's where a lot of the fan heat comes from. Are we preparing for a similar repositioning of the club in order to ease the pain of a transition over the next 12 to 18 months as we obviously come up against FFP pressures and probably have to conduct some very major surgery on the squad. That would be the implication I would drive based on her experience level, that he sees her as a good operational, financial leader who can oversee that. I would love to be proven wrong. I always say this, whether it be in the management side, the footballing side or the commercial side, I want Wednesday to prove me wrong. But it's easy to have a degree of cynicism. And for the rest of the fan base, it's much easier not to have the cynicism, but just to assume the worst.
Yeah.
And in the simplest form possible, every appointment at the senior level sends a message. It sends a message to the fan base, it sends a message to the football community about what you're about. And by appointing this lady, he is sending a message that he either sees capability in her that has been disregarded because of the circumstances at Charlton, in which case credit to him when those results proved otherwise, or he's sending a message that actually he has a disregard for the fan base at a level that he's willing to adopt a similar level of antagonism in order to get the results he needs. Neither one of which would be the message that I would really like to have seen him extol, which is that we have ambitions of being a much better organised, much more heavily organised and equipped for the future club in terms of infrastructure.
There's kind of something a little interesting in the fact that her appointment is announced literally on the 1st of January, on the first day of the transfer window. It feels like that if we were to get together in a month's time, we'd have a much better idea as to what this appointment is really about and what her agenda is ultimately going to be. I kind of feel like with the way things are going at the moment, we will probably know within the next week, because that's how quickly things are moving at the moment. I think we'll get a very clear indication pretty quickly as to what direction we're going in. We're going in now. To kind of try and pick on a positive view on this, which is that we've said for a while we can't just carry on going in the direction that we're going in. We can't just carry on with a very passionate but slightly kind of renegade owner who just kind of wants to do everything his own way without really kind of taking any kind of feedback or without anyone that's making decisions and doing the stuff that needs to be done. At least now we've got that, and it might not have been. I wouldn't have thought that it would be anywhere near the top of anyone's kind of preference in terms of who we bring into the club. But at least we've got some kind of indication of the fact that he recognises the current direction can't continue and we do need to change direction. I think we don't know what that direction is, and that's a worry. The unknown is always going to be a worry, but the way we were doing it before clearly wasn't working anyway. So maybe we haven't really got anything to lose.
We can only judge the results, right? So same principle as Carlos being in the rearview mirror. Her tenure at Charlton is in the rearview mirror. Mr. Chansiri is damned if he does, damned if he doesn't at the moment in the fans' eyes, which is a function of what's going on the pitch. We need to come back to that. Let's see what January holds. The appointment of the new manager and what happens to the playing squad are the things that we really need to watch out for. Those will be the immediate signals of intent.
Right. I think I've been trying to delay this for as long as possible, but we're going to have to talk about Burton. And if the kind of 30 minutes of discussion before this has been at times uncomfortable, we reach this point. You described it as there'll be people that have not seen a worse performance in the last 10 years. And obviously we went down to Brentford together. We've seen 2 games in 2 days. And you kind of came away from Brentford thinking that's pretty bad. That's got to be a low point. It's upwards from here. And Burton was just diabolical, wasn't it? It was shambolic. All 3 goals were pretty poor defensively, and that's ignoring the horrendous defending that gave away a penalty which Joe Wildsmith saved. What an awful 90 minutes that was.
As bad as I've seen at Hillsborough in a long time. I said 10 years earlier on, it might even be slightly longer, and we've seen some pretty rubbish games. For so many reasons. I was for my sins, I was trying to do live tweets for the Owls Americast account, and it just over the course of the 90 minutes, the tweets were getting more depressive, more aggressive, and frankly more cataclysmic as we approached full time. It was just an atrocious performance from 14 Wednesday players. Maybe we can single a couple of people out for praise, but let's start with what it was. It wasn't just flat. It was abject and uninspired. There was no energy in the team whatsoever. I know Bullen had tried to rotate his squad and tried to bring some life back in after a busy Christmas period, but I refuse to accept that any of those players were fatigued or tired. They just didn't have any motivation. They didn't have any inspiration or any will to succeed for Sheffield Wednesday. And I don't like the chant, "You're not fit to wear the shirt." Even in the worst times, I think you've got to try and find a way to stay with the players. But none of them deserved anything other than the hair lashing they got from Bullen after the game, because it was insipid and disgusting to see players not competing for challenges, taking so many liberties at the back like Butterfield did with that 1-2 with Louvens, which, I think somebody said it looked like a training ground exercise with Brentford on Saturday. It looked like Wednesday were having a training ground exercise against Burton on Monday and didn't care what the conclusion was. Somebody pointed out on Twitter earlier on, replaying the replay of that series of events that led to the penalty. Neither Louvens nor Butterfield go back and G up Wildsmith before the penalty. Right. Neither of them go back to Wildsmith after he saves the penalty, after he gets them out of jail. And that's just representative of something that's rotten in that squad. That even when you've got a young goalkeeper who has been saving their backs for the last 3-4 games and is doing so again, they aren't on top of him, giving him all of the encouragement that he should be receiving for what he did in the first 5 minutes. And then that set the tone. That set the tone for a performance that it didn't get going. When we finally started to exert a little bit of pressure, because Burton give you the ball, they're happy to sit back in their banks of four and sort of invite you onto us. We couldn't carve out anything like a real chance. I think Joao had one header at the back post, which he should have done better with, from a Jack Hunt cross, which was well targeted. But then when the first goal came, I mean, what did Bully say? It was like something you wouldn't even see in a playground. I mean, I think everyone just turned around with embarrassment in the stadium. There's 25,000 fans there watching their left back pick the ball up 35 yards out and run past 8 Wednesday players, none of whom can put a challenge in. When he finally loses the ball, it runs free, and not one Wednesday player goes for the second ball. He literally just walks through and toe pokes it into the goal. I just can't remember seeing something like that in a long time at Hillsborough.
It's as bad a goal that we've conceded in. I don't know. I can't think of anything like it. I mean, it was astonishingly bad. It was just terrible. And probably the worst thing about Saturday was the fact that not Saturday, New Year's Day, was the fact that Burton actually weren't very good. They didn't really do anything. They played a very Nigel Clough kind of game, which was just kind of keeping things tight. But we single-handedly made them look great.
I could be wrong, but I think they had 2 attacks in the second half. They scored from both of them.
Yeah.
One of your good friends, Peter Lohman, tweeted out something after the game. If you look at expected goals, in other words, the number of likely goals a team scores on average across the course of a season, their expected goal ratio for the season so far is about 0.8. Right. In other words, they rarely score a goal. They struggle to score 1 goal in a game. Wednesday, had them way above that target by half time, and they scored 3 past us. Yeah. This is a defence that a year ago we were lauding as being the backbone of a team that was pushing for the Premier League. Yes, we've got players out for injury, but you don't lose the principles of being able to play football. What our players have lost is motivation. They've lost the will to play for one another. They seem to have lost the will to play for Sheffield Wednesday. And the questions I want answered at this point is, where is that stemming from? Is that stemming from something that is personnel driven within the squad? Is it something that's driven from the way that the club is being run at a higher level, which is stemming through to the playing staff? Is it another factor? And I'm struggling to come up with a causal factor that can really explain it, because I don't see players that want to play football, that are having fun playing football, and that are receiving any form of organisation to play football on the field. And that's a team that's heading rapidly into a relegation dogfight.
Yeah, I'm not normally someone that kind of takes the negative viewpoint on stuff, and my relevance here is I would normally be when fans are singing or chanting something that's very negative about the team while a game is actually happening. I'll normally be quite opposed to that. When with 5 minutes to go, fans were singing "You're not fit to wear the shirt," I thought I can't argue with them. I'm not going to join in. I cannot argue with that. I mean, that is as bad as it's been. As I said earlier, I did set myself a challenge in the car on the way back.
Go on, James. Dig us out of this hole, because we have to find a way
I only had
upwards.
2 beers because I wasn't very well anyway. Whereas normally in the car on the way back, I'd just fall asleep in the back and it wouldn't matter. So I tried to come up with 5 positive viewpoints from Saturday. So 5 positive ways of looking at it. Number 1, at least now we know Lee Bullen is not the answer. After the Forest game, a few fans saying, "Oh, maybe you give it till the end of the season." After Brentford, a few people saying, "Oh, it might just be a blip." Now we know he's not going to get results from that squad. He probably needs to go when we bring someone else in. It's probably his time with Wednesday has come to an end.
And if I can just ride on that for a second,
draws a line under that.
Absolutely, and it's taught us something else as well. Just pure motivation is not enough.
Yeah.
So the idea that we just get a hairdryer manager in who's going to come and yell at this squad, that will not get at the results that we need.
Number 2, as a positive, is at least now our season is defined. So playoffs, stop talking about it. Promotion, stop talking about it.
Never.
This season is about getting the number of points that we need to stay in this league, and that is it. And at least now we have direction. So if we win a couple of games, this kind of like, maybe we could sneak into the playoffs. Just forget all about that. Now we have some direction, we have some definition to what our season is about, which we've not really had. It's been up and down and all over the place. At least now we clearly see the fact that, as you say, the kind of form that we're in, we are ultimately in a bit of a relegation.
We need 20 to 25 more points, and that means that we're building the foundations as we do so for a better season in 2018-19. A week ago I said a promotion season, but we may have to work even harder than that.
It was a day where a new era started at Hillsborough. Whether it's going to be a good new era or not, we don't know. But the appointment of a chief exec before the game at least is an indication of the fact that we are moving in some kind of direction, which is better than moving in no direction. That's positive number 3. Positive number 4. We've still got a new manager to come in, and a new manager coming in is going to bring in new ideas. And that is something that we know that we are severely lacking at the moment. We're lacking in ideas. We had one kind of I call it a blip along the way, really, against Forest, where it kind of looked like maybe we did have those ideas. We don't. We know that we don't. And if we'd have brought a new manager in already and we were losing 2-0 at Brentford and 3-0 at home to Burton, then I'd be a lot more worried than I am with us doing that under a caretaker manager, and we've still got the new person to come in who's got some ideas to bring to us. A
new person and new people. Don't forget that Carlos has taken his coaching squad with him, his technical analysts. You have to assume that whoever Wednesday appoint will bring in the equivalent, whether the same roles or alternative roles. So that's going to be a range of people around the squad, and again, we have to trust in the fact that package of individuals are going to be able to exert something from these players.
Positive number 5, we are at the very start of a transfer window, so we know that we need players in. We need to change stuff. At least we can do it. If this was happening at the start of February and the transfer window had just closed, then there is nothing you can do, and there's not even a loan window anymore. You are stuck with the players that you've got. So if we need to get some players out, we need to get some players in. We've got the opportunity to do it. That's not to say that we will do it, but at least we are at the point of the transfer window where we've got a lot of time and a lot of scope to be able to change some things. So that was my 5th positive. So I came away thinking, nothing particularly positive from the day at all, but at least those 5 positives are not bad.
They're not bad. If I can add a 6th as well, no, I think credit to you, because I can promise you in the car on the way home in the. Well, man, we weren't talking about positives. I think he was trying to encourage me to remember that in the 60s things were okay, which is his way of kind of retreating into his shell. But no, a 6th positive is actually the players who stood out and did okay against Brentford, stood out and did okay again against Burton. Actually, Adam Reach was still trying, still showing pace and purpose, and and one of those few players who seem to have the heart to chase down lost causes. I think Joao, again, putting himself about well. I still criticise how clinical he is when he gets himself into opportunities, but at least he was getting into those opportunities. I think we could not level the same praise towards John Rhodes. And I thought Jack Hunt, while he stayed on the pitch until he got injured again, was more probing and more encouraging at right back. And there were just a couple of times when he linked up with Wallace, and we suddenly remembered, what those two could do in the past. I don't think they will do it again. But those three stood out to me, and Joe Wildsmith, who I talked about earlier on again, was did all that was asked of him, and he was left in no man's land for the goals that were scored. I don't levy any criticism for him for those 3 goals. So yeah, there's one or two bright sparks in the squad, but to come back to your point in terms of the transfer window ahead, this squad needs major surgery now. Yeah. I think we talked before about how age had crept up on it, malaise has crept into it. Something very wrong has happened within it. And without knowing what the reasons for that are, we have to shake it up at this point. And that will probably mean some of the names who a couple of months ago we couldn't have tolerated the idea of losing need to move on. Yeah. And we need some fresh blood, some hungry players, and somebody to fuse them together into something that can fight to stay in the division.
I think that's a bigger process than January, isn't it? And we'll get on to. In fact, it's a good time for us to get on to now, talking about who the right person to bring in terms of manager is, because it's obviously the rumours have kind of chopped and changed over the course of the last week. As we said earlier, it was nailed on Steve McLaren. There've been various other names kind of mentioned.
Frank Sidebottom.
Yeah. Frank Sidebottom was spotted in the. Maybe not.
It was FC Nantes, wasn't it? He was in the director's box.
But do we kind of need? We almost need 2 appointments right now, don't we? We need someone who is a bit of a firefighter who can come in and make sure that we don't get relegated. And we need someone that has an immediate new manager bounce just to get the number of points we need to stay in this division. But we similarly also need someone that can start building a longer term plan of what we need to do, partly in January, partly in the summer, to actually sort us out for next season. As you say, it's pretty much a whole scale rebuild. You can't do that. We can't do that in January.
No,
and
it's
also,
a 3-window
if
job.
someone came in that could do it, do they take the eye off the ball in terms of the fact that we need those points to stay in the league?
To put nickel on it, we need 2 appointments. I said last week that ideally I'd like to see a director of sport. I stand by that. And in my opinion, the director of sport is the person who comes in and performs that major overhaul of the football infrastructure and squad. And we need a firefighter coach who can come in and gel the players that they have available to them as we go through this window, by the end of this window, as we go into the summer, into a unit that fights for Sheffield Wednesday and fights for results in this league. And I think those are 2 very different people, to your point. I'm not entirely certain still who the right individuals are. No. But it is a much bigger job than one person.
It's really difficult, isn't it? You look at the names that are knocking around, and a week ago I was flying the flag a bit for Paul Hurst, whose name has kind of dropped away a little, and actually the stuff that's happened over the last few days particularly, has made me kind of think, actually, is that the right person? But I think I messaged you either last Thursday, last Friday morning, when the Andre Villas-Boas link was first kind of rearing its head, and kind of saying, that's quite interesting. What an interesting appointment that would be. And 3 or 4 days later, having originally thought, do you know what, that could be really interesting, and thinking, actually, that would probably be the worst thing that we could possibly do, because you've got a contemporary continental coach who's used to working within a really complex, developed system, and bringing him into a club that not only doesn't have that system, but is also just in a mess. Like, he's got no experience of sorting out a mess.
And at the moment he's driving a rally car around somewhere a long way away from here, right? He's I think the Dakar Rally until the end of January. We can't wait till the 20th of January. We have a game next Friday, week on Friday, which is going to have a big bearing on the direction of the season. And if the team turn up like they did yesterday, then I'm afraid the other half of the city are going to have a real massacre to cry about. Not the one that they exerted at Hillsborough that was never a massacre. So we can't wait for an AVB. I again, he's a manager who I like the sound of. Same way as when we talked about Paulo Fonseca. But those are luxury managers that we can maybe talk about as summer hires, in my opinion. Right now, your phrase firefighter is the right one. So you've got to be looking at someone who's going to combine coaching skill, respect, and a degree of motivational capability as well. And those are few and far between. It's not a Steve McLaren, that's for sure.
Can I perform a monumental U-turn right now?
Please.
A week ago, I discussed how utterly boring and dislikable Paul Lambert is, and what an uninspiring appointment it would be.
This is an enormous U-turn.
Right now, he's actually exactly what we need. And it's taken 2 games of football for me to realise that. Because Paul Lambert, when you talk about someone that's uninspiring, he makes no bones. He will be very honest about the fact that I think he's only stayed friends with one player that he's ever played with. He doesn't make friends. He's not interested in making friends in football. He will criticise his players. He will tell them what they've got to do, and if they don't do it, he'll get rid of them and bring in someone else that will do it in an instant. He is quite old-fashioned in his approaches to football management, and I think right now that's what we need. And I don't like him, and I don't like anything about him, but I think that he could be the person that can get something out of the squad that we've got, because we're not going to have a new squad at the end of January. We might have a couple of different faces, but it's going to be the basic crux of the same team that we've got now. And I just think that Lambert is the kind of person who can go in, not be interested in making friends. He's not interested in what they think about him. All he gives a damn about is, we've got this number of points to get before the end of the season for this team to keep up, to stay in the division. And I can see him doing it. And that is, it's been a difficult one for me to kind of come to that conclusion, because I really dislike him. I strongly dislike him. And I find him just, I would not listen to a single one of his pre or post-match interviews, because I just can't stand listening to him. But I do think that he might be the right person for us now.
No, you definitely wouldn't get a rise out of him the way you got out of Bullen in his post-match interview yesterday. Which, by the way, just as an aside, the fact that the club had to write out verbatim a lot of Bullen's comments on their official social media was quite sensational yesterday evening, given some of the things he had to say about that squad and just how unacceptable that performance was. Yeah, I can't get excited about Paul Lambert. I hear everything you're saying. It is a monumental U-turn. If he could live up to that billing, then I can put all of my negative vibes to one side, because it's about results, and I'll accept that. There will be fans who say that at this point what we really need is a Neil Warnock. Somebody who again has no bones about making friends, but just wants to grind out results. And somebody in that ilk is probably exactly right. Another name that's been on the list for some time, which again I was initially quite negative about, which I think probably could do a job for us now, is Karanka. I don't think anybody would get superbly excited about his form of football, and he probably would fall out with a couple of our players by benching them and not giving them a look in. But his defensive solidity and his understanding of how to get a team playing as a unit to cut out some of the nonsense that we've seen over the last few games, I think is probably something that we could make use of right now. All of which is to say that whoever is appointed needs to come on board, and Bullen was advocating for it yesterday, as soon as possible, so they can start working with this squad and put us in a position where we're turning up with heart and with organisation next Friday. Those are the two very, very most basic things that the squad has to display. Otherwise, the emotional turmoil that this fan base will go into, let alone the chaos that it'll instill in the squad if we get turned over next Friday night at Bramall Lane, is not really worth thinking about.
It's a big old month, really, isn't it? Because we've got this kind of, I'm going to call it like a pseudo break, because it isn't really. We've got Carlisle in the Cup on Saturday. I was saying in the car on the way back, I would play.
Turn out the youth.
Entirety academy players. I don't give a toss if we win, draw, whatever. That it buys us a little bit of time now to be able to get a coach in.
You want to teach that as a friendly game. I mean, George Boyd is apparently fit again, so give him a run out for 90 minutes, but link him with a bunch of the youth players. Maybe inject a little bit of energy in from the Joaos and Reaches, but let's not waste time.
I wouldn't play anyone who we think has got even a chance of playing on Friday the 12th on the basis of the fact that, with our luck at the moment with injuries,
that's fair.
Anything that risks another one, just don't bother. And I don't, they could play the kit man as centre forward for me. I just think let's just get that game out of the way, and if we lose, then we lose. It doesn't matter. Our season is not going to be defined on how far we get in the FA Cup. As we said earlier, we know now our season is defined on us staying in the Championship and giving us a chance to build on next season. So if it means throwing that game, and I'm sure there'll be someone listening that will personnel talk about what a knobhead I am for saying that, but I just don't care. The FA Cup, forget it. I'm not bothered. We've got before the end of this month, we've got obviously United on the 12th. We've got Cardiff on the 20th. We've then got Middlesbrough away. Middlesbrough coming into some kind of form now under Tony Pulis, who is probably exactly the kind of manager that we could have done with. And Cardiff not having a bad season, with a manager who might want to get one over on us. It's a damn hard month, and we've got to get points from somewhere, because we could be, by the end of this month, we could genuinely be in the bottom three.
Well, we're 6 points above the bottom three right now, and it's perfectly reasonable to say that those are 3 games that we're likely to lose, just based on the form that we're in, the chaos that we're in. So if you go into February and you're still on 30 points, you have to assume that one of the bottom 3 have picked up 3, 4, maybe 6 points from that period. We could be in the bottom 3. And the table itself doesn't matter. The point is the mentality and the momentum that the squad has, and we have to turn a result or two in that run of games, which only illustrates the task facing somebody coming in. It doesn't make it an attractive task. I think Wednesday may need to recalibrate, because of what's happened in the last 2 games, the type of individual they're going after, which maybe they had some storied expectations of Chansiri's brand in mind. Wednesday right now looks like a club in crisis, so we've got to cut our cloth accordingly.
Finally, I guess, usually, the first discussion that you have at the start of January would be about the transfer window. Who do you want? Which positions do we need to strengthen in? And I can't even ask you that question, because it's impossible. At the moment, if I was to say what positions do we need to strengthen in, how would you possibly narrow it down? With the possible exception of goalkeeper, where we're probably all right. Beyond that, you can just take your pick, can't you? It's just at the moment it is. It's almost impossible to kind of narrow down and try and figure out exactly what positions we need.
It's difficult to get down to the singular position, but I would advocate that we have players of goal scoring capability. If you can build a team that services them better, we can finish chances. And I can drop that all the way from those who we probably give more credit to, all the way down to Nihu. But sorry, that was just one for Lord H. Where I don't think we have the players and the personnel to survive in this league at the moment is at the back. I think left back is a real problem for us. I think Morgan Fox was asleep at the controls on Saturday. I thought he was atrocious against Burton, and in my mind, a left back would be a high priority purchase right now.
Can I echo that? Because I thought that Morgan Fox on New Year's Day was absolutely appalling, and actually worrying in terms of the fact that, to me, it looked like something had happened the night before and part of his brain had been removed. Like, he just didn't seem to know what was going on or how to play football.
No, he had the bottom.
He looked like basically headless chicken. Just didn't have a clue. Did not have a clue. Probably not the only player that I would say this about, but if you gave him the opportunity to say they will never wear a Wednesday shirt again, probably take it.
And he's a player I've tried to give the benefit of the doubt from. But I think I said to you on Saturday against Brentford, this is before he turned out against Burton, that he kind of reminded me playing football when I was at school. I could kick a ball and I could run after a ball, and I enjoyed playing. But I reached a level when I knew I was well behind the curve.
Yeah.
Players were They had the extra yard of pace, the technical capability, and I was puffing just to try and keep up with the play, let alone to play a role in the play. And he looked like that against Brentford. They were running rings around him. So left back is a priority. We have to address the centre back issue. We need a storied Championship centre back in there who can command the back four and start to command the team, because there is no leadership on the pitch. Whether Glenn Loovens was sick with flu on Monday and shouldn't have played, whether he shouldn't have played on Saturday against Brentford, is irrelevant to my mind. He is not leading that team the way he should. And that's not to be critical of the man and what he's done, it's to say that right now we need leaders on the pitch who are firebrands, who are charging, who are in the faces of their teammates in a positive way. We need to bring somebody or some people in to do that, and probably similar in the middle of the park as well.
I think that's about it. I mean, there's been plenty for us to kind of go over there. I feel a little bit kind of silly asking you this, really, but kind of looking back over it, have you enjoyed your football experience while in the UK?
I've loved it. I love it because of the conversation and because of the experience of being here with everyone. I mean, we've got a great community in the US of people who get just as passionate and dissect every game in just the same way, and we talk about the same issues, and we react, and thanks to social media we can interact with everyone back here. But nothing beats being at Hillsborough, hearing it firsthand. Nothing beats the bovril that burnt my tongue yesterday at Burton, or spending the day with you guys on Saturday, going down to Brentford. So everything except for the performances on the pitch and the results has been tremendous. And seeing it firsthand gives you a very up close understanding of what needs to happen. I'm a layperson. If I can see it, I have to hope that people within the club hierarchy can see it. So I have to put my faith in the fact that can be what we start to experience as we go through January, as we make these decisions and hopefully set up for a better spring.
Cool. When are you next back over?
In about 3 weeks.
Is it that soon?
Beginning of February, but I'll be down in London, so unless it coincides with an away game, I'll probably won't be at Hillsborough for a good couple of months. Okay. So I'll be back for the recovery.
What people don't know is that you on New Year's Day I put a photo on Twitter of a pair of trainers that I was wearing to the game, because I've run out of trainers to wear that we haven't lost while I've been wearing so far this season, which incidentally I'm going to burn in the next few days. But while you've been over, you've been wearing a very fetching, I must say, Owls Americas jacket, which is loosely based on the team jacket that they wore in 1966. And you're going to have to burn that jacket, you know that.
It literally is going to be on a bonfire. If it ever stops raining in Sheffield, it'll be burned before I get the train south tomorrow. With apologies to Paul Owen, who actually developed the prototype. But the prototype has proved itself to be highly unsuccessful, so we will retire it now. But it has generated a lot of interest, so maybe the second generation jacket will be more successful.
I think the finished product will be fine, and I'll definitely be ordering one. But that particular prototype has, I don't know where it came from, but somewhere along the line something's been injected into that, which is not good. Maybe it's either the jacket or it's me, right? So if I leave the country and leave the jacket in the country, I'm going to be damned. So I'll take it with me. I'll burn it when I get back to New York, in appropriate fashion for the customs and regulations. And maybe everything turns around next Friday. I mean, what a way to pick up the recovery, right? To restart this fan base and to restart this club than getting a result at Bramall Lane. That would be, I mean, we are, as a fan base, we are so reactionary, aren't we? And we're all guilty of this, that, after losing 3-0 at home to Burton, which is bad, it's kind of the end of the world. It's one defeat, you don't lose any more points for who you lose against or anything like that. So, maybe going to Bramall Lane and winning, as you say, is the perfect antidote now, and that will inject all the positivity we need. And as we've said today, it could be the start of a new era at Hillsborough. What a great place to kind of start it.
Why not? Ever optimistic, right? Happy clappers.
Yes, happy clappers. James, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for your time over the last couple of weeks, and safe journey back home.
Thank you. Look forward to watching on iFollow and with all the lack of replays next week.